All right, hello Facebook. This is Tommy Valentine with Historic Athens. We want to thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of This Moment in History, COVID-19 in Athens, Georgia. Today's episode 45 of our series. We're planning a total of 55 interviews. Once these interviews have concluded, we are going to be contributing the entire project as a digital archive to our local libraries and research institutions. Today, we are very excited to have a special guest. We have Mayor Kelly Girtz. And we really appreciate the mayor taking some time to be a part of this project. If this is your first episode you've ever seen, we encourage you to go back into the video archives at facebook.com/historic Athens. You can find some of our past interviews with community leaders, entrepreneurs, elected officials, and the like, so that we can provide a full cross section of Athens, Georgia. We expect an exciting show today. We also want to make sure we thank this week's sponsor. Each week of the 11 weeks, a different sponsor stepped up to allow our nonprofit to explore and document this moment in Athens history. Actually, the Office of Mayor Kelly Girtz is one of those sponsors, but this week is Peggy and Denny Gallus. So we really want to thank the Galluses for making this week possible. And we'll talk a little bit more later in the program on how people can get plugged in. So with that said, if you have any COVID-related questions or comments, any words of encouragement, feedback, or otherwise, as long as this video is still live, you can jump right into the comment section, assuming you're watching it at Historic Athens Facebook page. If you're in a watch party, head over there. But if you comment directly below this live video on Historic Athens, we will be able to hopefully include your question in today's program. That's about enough of an opening spiel. Let's get to our guest. We're going to go ahead and bring in Mayor Girtz right now. So give me just one moment to make that switch. Right. All right, Mayor Girtz, let me just get your audio kicked on. All right, hello. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Tommy, it's always good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, Mayor, we want to thank you for jumping in with this. We know that this is a busy time. But the busier you are, the more important it is for us to kind of document history. Those things overlap. I know that what we like to do usually during the first quarter of the program or so is make sure we take some time to get to know you, know the work you do, and know your background and relationship to Athens, Georgia. That way, whether it's someone watching now or in a future generation, they can really know who we're talking to. So I'll share my intro to this, Mayor. First time I met you, I was a substitute teacher, and you were a teacher at, I think, Classic City High. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
That's right. And
I
think
taught for 7 years.
That's right. We both had darker hair and more of it, although you held on to yours a little better than I've held on to mine. But since then, I just think, I mean, that's been almost 2 decades now, I think. Since then, I've had the pleasure of seeing you serve in the community. I know that your relationship with Athens is one that includes time as an educator, time as an elected official, time as someone out picking up litter, as you're frequently seen doing. Can you just introduce yourself and talk about your background and relationship to Athens, Georgia?
Sure. So I became aware of Athens, Georgia, probably like a lot of people did in the 1980s through the music scene here that I was familiar with. I was and remain an enormous music fan, and grew up mostly in Norfolk, Virginia. My folks are from Minneapolis, born in Minneapolis, and then raised sort of in the suburbs there. And bounced around a lot in my very early youth in the early 1970s because my dad was a service member in the U.S. Navy, where he remained for his entire career for 30 years, before then becoming a contractor. And we landed in Norfolk, I guess, late 74, and I remained there for about 20 years. So unlike a lot of military brats, was in the same town all through elementary school, went to the same high school for 4 years. Go Titans, Lake Taylor. And after getting out of high school, didn't go immediately to college. Actually, was disenchanted enough with education that I thought I'd never darken the door of another classroom. So great irony, given my eventual 20 years in public ed. Got an undergrad degree from Old Dominion University in sociology with a minor in criminal justice, largely focused on family issues of race and gender. And after bouncing around for a little bit after that, landed in Athens in January 1996, where I applied to graduate school and ultimately finished a master's degree in teaching at Piedmont College, who had just opened up their campus here. Later went back to school at UGA and got a graduate certificate in educational leadership. Was really fortunate to get hired at Coyle Middle School in 1998 by Dr. Maxine Easom. And she continues to serve as a mentor in this community and served as this great entree into the community. It's probably worth noting too, I worked service work for a long time, retail, food service. I delivered pizza for so long that was kind of my self-definition for a while. And took a while before my self-definition was actually that of educator. And in the same way, I'm just now beginning to wake up in the morning and think, oh yeah, I'm the mayor of this town. After teaching for about 10 years, I really loved all the aspects of the community that I was able to uncover through my relationships with kids and their families. And through that, really recognized that I wanted to be more engaged in Athens and also having an interest in other public policy areas. Ran for county commission in the fall of 2006 and won that seat, and then served 3 terms on the county commission before running for mayor in 2018, and was successful in the running. And I hope I've been at least somewhat successful in the doing.
You know, when we interviewed your colleague, Mike Hamby, we talked about the relationship between his time in the service industry and how he approaches his role as county commissioner. You kind of alluded to your history in the service industry yourself. How has that experience now played into your time as mayor?
I think in a bunch of ways, some kind of cursory and then some at the core. I mean, at the core, I work for you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I am your employee. And when that's 130,000 used, that means I'm not always going to land on the decision that any one people or every 100 people would like to see me land on. But I take very seriously the work that I do from a customer service perspective. Still, when I pick up the phone and say, "Good afternoon, this is Kelly Girtz," I still feel like I'm my 16-year-old self who learned that phone protocol working for Edward Spalding at the Record Bar on Military Highway in Norfolk. It's like the same cadence when I say those. The work, especially in these recent months, is so voluminous it's not even funny. And so, I've got many hundreds of emails to get to a day, many meetings, public and then small scale. But I try to bring into every one of those an open ear and understand that I've got something to learn from the interactions I have with people, whether it's in the nonprofit sector or the business community or on the street corner, and trying to integrate that into my work and get it ever better. And it was the same way when I was working in a record store, delivering pizza, or, working around the corner from here at the Holiday Inn. I just wanted to do the best work I possibly could do, and wake up and have the next day be a good one where I felt like, well, I'd learned something from my last experience, and this is going to be even better as a result.
In today's politics, most political candidates are coached to employ soaring rhetoric or vitriol. They're encouraged to be loud and unforgettable. Often also encouraged to use vocabulary that wouldn't fly much over the head of a 6th or 7th grader. One of the things that people notice about you is that you do speak more like an educator. You tend to, it's not that you haven't given a speech or two, but generally your approach to things is a little more contemplative. And even some of the vocabulary you've already used on this interview, I know would be a little outside the range of a 6th grader. What defines your approach to how you use the bully pulpit and how you communicate with your constituents?
Well, you mentioned loud. I mean, we're in a time that's just loud as hell, Tommy. Whether that's the way people feel comfortable interacting with each other, sometimes live in person, or maybe even more significantly, in social media and through electronic media. I mean, you certainly see, I think, what's the ugliest exemplification of the bully pulpit in our current president in Washington, D.C. And so maybe it's in response to that, but maybe it's just recognizing the broader environment. I don't want to have loud conversations because I think in the roar and in the noise, we lose the humanity and we lose common ground. I mean, I think we kind of lose our own humanity. In fact, it's not just we're dehumanizing other people. I think we're dehumanizing ourselves sometimes in that roar. And so I mean, I certainly think no less fervently about any of the specific goal areas or strongly held beliefs that I have, whether that's equity or environmental needs or other things. But the way I express those tends to be these days in hopefully relatively clear and not combative terms.
Right.
We've got so much work to do right now around healthcare, around race, around baseline community supports that I don't want to waste any of my energy because I'm just hollering. I mean, I just don't think, A, that's a good look, and B, I don't think it's effective for me at least. And I don't think it's effective for you, because if I'm just getting the hair on the back of your neck, unnecessarily standing up or raising your blood pressure, you're not going to be as effective a resident of this community.
You know, Kelly, history teaches us that leaders often run for office for certain reasons, and then shortly after taking office find themselves in an environment that's very different than the one they ran for. I think of, Barack Obama running on a campaign that focused primarily on healthcare and on systemic change, and then emerging into a recession. I think of, if you go back and watch some of the Gore-Bush debates, you can see Bush arguing for isolationism and a lower role for the U.S. on the world stage, and then having 9/11. I think that I'm sure similarly there are things that you ran for that you have in mind for your first term, and yet here you are serving as the mayor that's overseeing our community's largest pandemic in more than a century. How do you grapple with that? What your goals are versus the times you're in?
I haven't left behind any of those goals. Haven't marginalized them. I mean, they're all still there. Whether that's stronger youth development activity, a focus on healthier and safer neighborhoods, on workforce development expansion, on higher wage employment, all those are still goal areas. I mean, certainly, the reality was in the first, let's say 6 weeks of the pandemic really hitting our shores, that was all we did. It was, pandemic 101, or maybe pandemic like 99. You know how in college you take those classes that you don't get any credit for. I felt like I was doing work that I should not be getting any pay for, because I was just figuring out what on earth was going on and making it up as we went along to some degree. Probably after that first 6 weeks, we've moved to the point where there's a layer of very contemporary response activity, but then a growing layer of continuation of some of those things that we were talking about earlier. I mean, just last week, I had 2 lengthy meetings with the county manager about some of the inclusionary zoning work we're going to do to ensure mixed income neighborhoods get off the ground from a policy perspective, through some of the planning and zoning code that's going to be updated, as well as through how some fiscal mechanisms can support that. So that's a good example of something that certainly wasn't going on, say, mid-March to late April, but now is happening again.
Kelly, I think I'm thinking back to your mayoral announcement speech. And, one of the things I'm at the center of a Venn diagram of, as an MPA person, as someone who works for Historic Athens, I love public policy. So I'm a wonk, and I also love history. And that speech was both of those things. You talked a lot about some of the policies you had in mind, but you also spoke with an eye towards history. You spoke about the bottoms. You talked about the disenfranchisement of African Americans in Athens. I know that for everything I learn on this job, you have your own databases. You're someone who has spent your own free time in special collections digging into the past of Athens. How have you continued to try to balance that view now that you're the one making that history?
Among other things, I've brought in other people to continue to help me learn. I think somebody who we shared as a colleague and collaborator was Charlene Marsh, who formerly had been on student government at the university. Just having that is important from a couple perspectives. I mean, both from just my need to learn more, particularly in an environment where I don't have the capacity to hang out over at the Hargett Library and go through archives to the degree that I might have 3 or 4 years ago. The other thing that I've been thinking about is just how the very specific experience that I had moving here as a 25-year-old might relate to my experience in Athens. I've been here almost 25 years now. And if I'd remained in Norfolk, which bears a lot of resemblance to Athens, a southern city, but also a city with lots of outside influences, I may not have been able to cast the fresh eyes I would have needed on Norfolk had I remained there, simply because I was walking the same streets and seeing the same sights. I think because I changed locales and did have fresh eyes on Athens as I was coming into greater understanding around history and matters of equity and race and healthcare application and so many other things, it sort of provided this new venue for me to learn in.
I want to just flash just two of the comments we've received so far. So local Cedar Shoals, fellow Cedar Shoals graduate in Politico, Chris Perlera, all exclamation points. Hey, Chris. And then Francis Oliver saying, yay, Charlene. We always record these live casts with an eye towards the future, Kelly. And so I'm going to go ahead and stake my claim on the fact that 50 years from now, I'm sure we'll be talking about Senator Charlene Marsh or something like that.
I have no doubt.
So, Kelly, digging more into this just a bit. So, the trajectory from activist or educator to mayor, I'm sure that there were things from the outside looking in you thought were easy to change. Now that you're inside the system, you realize that maybe the nacre has built up a little bit more. Sorry, that's obscure. That's the inside of a seashell that produces a pearl. But that the system is more in rigor than you had anticipated. What have some of the things that have surprised you about doing this job? Some of the challenges that have been a bit more daunting.
So some of the challenges, maybe not speaking in just a singular voice. I've always got to speak to lots of different audiences, and to some degree, I have to sell those audiences on policy proposals and on kind of funding matters. And so when you're a campaigner and when you're an advocate or activist, you're sometimes speaking with your singular voice. It's not like my voice has gone away, but I've got to be able to say things to a broad range of people that resonate. I mean, sort of back to kind of even the tone I tend to take. I mean, I want as much of the population to be along for the ride that we are on right now around a safer and more sustainable and kind of more giving community. And if I'm just speaking to people who have my same points of reference, who've read the same Noam Chomsky books I've read, I mean, that's one kind of conversation. But I'm speaking to 20-year-olds. I'm speaking to 70-year-old business owners. I'm speaking to academics. I'm speaking to people in the service industry. I mean, I've got to talk to a lot of different people. And so what I have had to do is try and speak in language that's going to make positive meaning of the things that we can work on together.
I saw Chris gave a go Jags. I wouldn't be a good Jaguar if I didn't throw that out. Of course, we have our local high school audience in general. I know we always have a few Gladiators watching.
And I'll note, I did my student teaching in the 97, 98 academic year at Cedar Falls High School for then coach Chad Cole, who's now, I think he's an assistant principal in the Beaufort City School District. Good guy, and great formative experience for me. It probably was early on in that year when I just knew beyond a shadow of a doubt I'm staying in Athens. It probably was by late 97. I'd been here almost 2 years, and I'm like, I'm just not going anywhere else. It's not happening. I found my spot.
Kelly, I'm going to really lower I got to go Glads here from Dan Delamater. I got to do that. I'm really going to lower the level of highbrow nature of this show by making the following reference, but it's the only way I can think to phrase the question. So in the classic film Roadhouse.
Woo! Yes, and it is a classic, my friend.
That's right. TNT's most played movie of all time.
Yeah, Jeff Healey Band working it up on stage.
That's right. That's right. So in the film, Patrick Swayze gives a famous speech about being nice, and that it's time to be nice until it's time not to be nice. And so even though you are someone that and I see, of course, Sterling Gardner. We love Sterling Gardner from Athens Boys and Girls Club. Thanks, Kelly, for all your hard work. Go Jags. Kelly, the point of that speech is that there's a time to be nice and there's a time to draw a line. And while certainly we've talked about your calmer nature, I've also seen you draw the line on occasion. Sometimes you we call it road shoes. Sometimes I have seen you draw a line and have to be firm. As a public official, where do you draw that line to be firm, to stop being nice and to start holding ground? How do you decide where that is?
Well, I mean, ahead of that point, I think you have to have provided a framework for good interaction and clarity in conversation. But once you've provided that framework for public input, for input from fellow elected officials and others, and you've assembled a pile of knowledge and awareness, you got to push the button on go. And there are some things where I whether it's me talking to a county commissioner or me talking to a staff member and saying, here's the date, this is when a thing needs to happen by, let's work backwards. If we've gotten to October and this thing hasn't happened, we're going ahead. Just know if you're not ready, the bus is leaving without you.
Yeah, I want to bring up an example like that that's recently happened. I think this will be comfortable to talk about, but we're in a town that is famous for, and you might even wish to defend this concept, but we're famous for when we take a step, we tend to start a study. So we're going to do a new road study, or we're going to do a new study on sewer versus septic, or a new study on eliminating poverty. Recently, as part of the discussion about Black Lives Matter and racial inequity and the role of discrimination in public, a couple weeks ago, you made headlines by giving a clear instruction like that to staff to begin the process of removing a Confederate memorial from downtown Athens. It's a memorial that's moved a number of times, but you indicated to staff to look into moving it again. And the same kind of declarative tone you just described, that's what reminded me to bring it up, because you were directing staff to start this process. Is that one of those times that you're talking about where you just, it was time to give a date and an instruction?
Absolutely. And I said to a couple press outlets that I don't think that there's any kind of crowing or beating in my chest I can do about it. I think I said exactly, and we'll say right now, I'm somewhat embarrassed that it's still there, and have long intended to move it from such a spot of public prominence in the specific way that it's prominent when as many people walk past it and drive past it as do, given that it's a monument that is related to a nation that was based on uh, racist dominance in a caste system. And when I heard the woman speak that Sunday about her pain of passing it, I just thought there's no damn way I can let another week go and not do the thing. And so it already was just about pent up to that point. I'd already done a lot of research, already offered staff some broad guidance and broad intent that I was going to move it, but there was just no more waiting, and there will be no more waiting.
Absolutely.
Don't blink because it'll be gone before you know it.
All right, I'll keep my eyes wide open. So Kelly, and to the dozens of folks we have here with us, don't go anywhere. I'm going to take 60 seconds to thank our annual sponsors. And the rest of the program, the rest of the 25 minutes we have with Kelly, we're going to spend on COVID-19. So stick with us. We're just going to quickly say some thanks. So first of all, I want to make sure we say thanks to Peggy and Denny Gallus again. This week's live cast was made possible by their generous contribution, and we want to thank them for that. Also, in front of you, you're going to see our different sponsorship levels and those sponsors that support us. We are a 52-year-old nonprofit that still receives bills every month. Being a historic nonprofit doesn't mean they let you off on that. And so we really appreciate all of the fine folks you see here. We encourage you to support the names of the people you see here because they're supporting, celebrating, and conserving community heritage in Athens, Georgia. So whether you're looking at who to do construction with, architecture with, accounting with, catering with, whether you're looking where to eat, there's so many options here of places you can support. Please consider doing so. Also, if you'd like to become a member or a donor yourself, membership begins at only $5 a month, and we celebrate every single member we receive in a big way. Please consider visiting historicathens.com to find out more about how to become a member. At 2 o'clock, when this episode is over, you can head over to our Facebook page for the Athens Welcome Center. Each day we're doing different live casts, including virtual workshops from the Athens Welcome Center, and then also historic site visits at National Register for Historic Places locations throughout Athens. Those are live, and we hope that you'll join us and our staff there. This is the schedule of our remaining guests, but also past episodes you can go back to see in our video archives. So next week we have Life from Chesson Community, manager Blaine Williams, Dr. Kim Klinowski, local epidemiologist and board of trustee member with Historic Athens, a student from ULEAD, Linda Davis. A lot of great conversations ahead, so we hope that you'll join us there. And then as one last note before we get back to Kelly, if you're looking for a quick and easy way to celebrate Athens and also help celebrate our mission, you can head to historicathens.com. We're working with Satisfactory Printing to present these 3 historic designs. If they go well, there'll be more to come. Right now we have Boulevard Historic District, Rock Springs Historic District, and Buildings of Athens, Landmarks of Athens. So we hope that you'll check those out at historicathens.com. So thank you so much. Thank you to Kelly for letting us say thanks. So Mayor, let's dive into COVID-19 and talk about that. So at what point did this come on your radar and become clear as something you were going to have to grapple with?
There was sort of this growing recognition, probably dating even prior to the new year. Was sort of aware of its spread in China. At some point early in the year, I attended the Economic Outlook Luncheon for the coming year that the Terry College of the University of Georgia does every wintertime. There was the notion that there's some 20% chance of a recession this year. And I think it was noted that, that could be a result of some supply chain issues, that could be a result of a number of things, including potentially what happens with global pandemic. And that planted something of a seed in my mind. And as February and early March unfolded, it definitely grew larger and larger and larger in the frame of my mind. And by the time I left with my family for Florida for spring break toward the beginning of March, it was clear that things were getting bad and they weren't going to be getting better anytime soon. Over the course of that week, I was in regular communication with the attorney and the manager here in City Hall, paying close attention to what was happening in the Pacific Northwest and on the West Coast. And so when we were driving back that Friday morning, Friday the 13th, it basically was at full boil. And I knew that I was going to be heading into an office that was going to have to do a lot of challenging things. And that theme just continued to resonate over that weekend and into the early next week. I joke about how the real title for my job ought to be cat herder in chief. And so with county commissioners, we did a lot of that cat herding to kind of get everybody in the same headspace and figure out how we were going to impose a shelter in place order. And so we did that on the 19th, that Thursday, following spring break. And that took lots of conversation and also some conversation internal with staff. We wanted to make sure that our enforcement mechanisms were fair and appropriate, and that we weren't criminalizing anybody's lack of knowledge about healthcare needs, but that our code enforcement and our police department and our other mechanisms were really going to be all focused on education and understanding and dissemination of information. And we had to make that explicit in our emergency management code. So we did that. And so I have felt as if since the 13th, that I've been on this policy and planning and response freight train.
Yeah. So, Kelly, about that freight train. So, one thing that we've talked to a lot of different leaders about is when you are the chief engineer of a freight train, there's not only the work you have to do, no one's handed you a guidebook that says, here's how to do it. And so that comes with its own stress and its own sense of pressure. How have you managed that pressure? How have you managed that stress? From those first white hot pressure days of being in the pressure cooker till now. How have you managed that?
I've attempted to follow that trend that we talked about earlier of not losing my cool unnecessarily. I knew that wouldn't contribute in a positive way to the environment. It wouldn't make for a better Athens. And so I've worked really hard at that. Some of that has been just trying to take care of myself. Do some very late night and very early morning walks. I was out for a walk about a week ago, just over a week ago, and found myself kind of on about a 4 or 5 mile walk on the Greenway, and was close to a friend of mine. And so I called him and said, "Hey man, I don't know if you're at home, but if you are, I'd love to just sit down and have a socially distanced conversation, because I need to put myself in the company of sane people, because maybe some of it'll rub off on me." And so I've taken that approach. In my work life, I benefit from having a bunch of super committed people on the county commission, a bunch of really gifted people here on county staff, Deborah and Blaine and Josh here in City Hall, Judd over in the attorney's office. Relied on them a whole bunch. And I've also looked at history some. I've thought, like, all right, when in the midst of crisis has America done some of its best work? And so I've looked back on what was done during the Great Depression to not only take care of people's immediate needs around employment and immediate needs around shelter and immediate needs around sustenance, but also could be done in such a way that would leave lasting impact. So one of my proposals that hopefully in the next series of days will receive approval by the county commission is to put together an Athens community core to take some of the people that already we had intended to address, people who were underemployed, people who didn't have the kind of post high school, post secondary education to ideally situate themselves economically, and have them work on projects that are going to make a better Athens. An Athens with fewer invasive species, an Athens where a place like Beach Haven that I know is close to you gets cleaned up, an Athens where, we advance the ability of our entire apparatus through some new hiring to put more sidewalks in place. The kind of things that were done in the 30s as lots of public works projects, using that term loosely, were stood up, and lots of conservation projects were stood up by putting people to work. And so we're in an environment where we've always needed to put a chunk of our population to work making better wages. And we really, really need that now. And I think we can do it in such a way where not only will we gain ground for those individuals right now, but we'll also make for a better Athens. And we'll also work hand in glove with those folks who we employ to get them into higher education. So, if you're learning to pour concrete now and build that sidewalk, and what you really want to do is become a medic, well, we're going to hook you up with that training program over at Athens Tech. So, getting back really to some of those long-term goals that we talked about earlier that I still have and will be embracing, but combining those goals with the needs of the moment.
I want to make sure we acknowledge a couple of comments. We have Bryn Meredith Adamson. Great job. I enjoy these so much. Thank you. Thank you, Bryn, for tuning in. Broderick Flanagan, local everything. I don't know where to start with his title, but artist, community organizer, a lot of other titles I'd give him that he would probably humbly pass off. But also the first guest we had on this program. But Broderick said, is it a pilot? So is the program you're talking about a gateway to other programs like it, Kelly?
Yes, the intention is that this is a new part of our ongoing programming. I mean, certainly we are going to have to pilot the work. And so there are a couple of very small scale projects that county staff members have put together. I think one around some invasive remediation and native species planting. But the goal is for it to be a permanent part of our movement of people into better employment.
Jennifer Lewis said, love the Athens Community Core idea. Look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you, Jennifer. Kelly, two things that I just wanted to kind of go through that are on the same ideas. Maybe the theme of this interview, which is, I think it's Mike Tyson who has the quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think we've been talking about how you are navigating that tension between having a plan and what gets thrown at you. In the middle of COVID-19, we've had two primary events happen that come to mind that we couldn't have planned for. One was the protests that we've seen break out, not just across the country, but here in Athens, Georgia. And I'd love to hear your take on that and some of the way that's unfolded in Athens. But the first one I want to touch on that's more recent, maybe still raw, is we had the passing of Athens Clarke County Commissioner Jerry Neesmith. I know yesterday some of us had the chance to tune in virtually to his memorial at Bishop Park. I know that you were a speaker there. I know you've known Jerry for a really long time. And in the midst of everything that's going on, it must be really hard to lose a friend and a colleague that you trust. What has it been like just since Sunday? How have you and your fellow mayor and commission group responded to that loss?
It's been like an out of body experience. I mean, I'm still in disbelief. I can't believe Jerry's gone. He was such a part of the firmament here. I learned a lot from him. I love being his colleague. I loved arguing with him sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll miss not having him to argue with. I'll miss not getting his persistent phone calls when things weren't the way that he knew that they should be.
Right.
But yeah, that's been really tough. It's been really tough, and obviously in the wake of already having this racial and policing reckoning that is going to be, I think, a long and unfolding reckoning. And the pandemic, to lose a friend all of a sudden to an accidental fall down the stairs, I mean, just sort of puts me in disbelief. I mean, I don't know what in the heck else 2020 could bring. I mean, I do know we're going to make it through. I don't have any doubt about that. I mean, we've got to, and we got to hang on to each other tight. But oh my heavens, it is crazy. And on the reckoning, go ahead.
Before I want to kind of bridge the two a little bit better than I did here. Jerry's fresh on my mind. I went for a long run before I got here, and it was strange to run by people that still have his yard signs up. The election just taking place. But when I think of Jerry, I think of years ago when I and a lot of community members had the pleasure of working alongside you to try to create a civil rights ordinance that would have allowed for a local civil rights committee. Jerry was outspoken in favor of the committee, and I remember him giving some remarks that really stuck with me about the importance of being able to change your mind in politics. He talked about growing up in an area where he would go to segregated movie theaters, not even realize that that was wrong, and it wasn't until later that he really realized that the world around him was the crazy part. And over the last week, since we've had the civil rights protests we've had in Athens, we've watched you do something that's very dangerous in politics, which is adjust what you're saying as the facts emerge. You mentioned our current president right now, and while I'm not one to get very political on this program, certainly there are political scientists who have pointed out that his approach to politics is say the same thing, double down, triple down, quadruple down, never look weak, and just hope the news cycle changes. And over the last weeks, we've gotten to watch you as mayor grapple with facts as they've come out, evolve in your position on things, and make sure that you're speaking to what you know. Can you walk us through that process, that sometimes precarious process?
Sure. Well, I mean, very specifically, after having, what I think was broadly felt to be a unifying march and demonstration almost 2 weeks ago on Sunday, to then have it end with the kind of remaining, 100 or so folks that were on Broad Street downtown, subjected to tear gas and get for 19 cases arrested, what was not the Sunday evening that any version of me ever wanted. And then to, get an immediate set of reports that indicated that some of the violently inclined folks who were visible during the day were at least instigators late in the evening, tracked certainly with what we had seen in some other communities. Tracked with the dangerous folks who I saw firsthand with my eyes that Sunday afternoon. But then to learn later in the week, no, in fact, if there was some of that element still present, it was a distinct minority, means that I've got to respond with honesty. And I think doubling down on something that's not accurate doesn't do anybody any good. I mean, it doesn't hold true to my own humanity, and doesn't hold true to the experience of the people who were there at 12:15 that Sunday night, early Monday morning. And I've got a lot of work to do, and I can't do that work if I'm spending a bunch of time trying to fake it.
Right.
So I think lying takes a lot of energy, and it doesn't do well.
So then the next logical thing I want to ask is, so you had this incident take place. You care a lot about this community. You spend a lot of hours on it. Not many people realize that you're paid much less, as if your job is not quite a full-time job. But despite that, you're putting in full-time hours, care about your community, you watch citizens you care about, people you've met, experience tear gas, experience things that you didn't want for a day that as you said, had been a celebration of our community's need for civil rights. And then a week goes by, the facts on the ground shift, your communication shifts. As many people have said, you seem to own that change and issue a pretty declarative apology for the way things took place. So then we flash forward to that next weekend, and here's another protest, and tensions were very high, and then it ended peaceably. The end of the night came, and cars were back on the road at Broad Street, and it had not repeated itself, the same type of interaction. What was your feeling like at roughly 12:15 that Saturday when you saw cars going back down Broad Street, realizing that was over?
That my prayers have been answered, and that every bit of energy and effort that I had made to have conversations about peaceful resolution, at the same time that we've got to have conversations around agitation. I mean, we've got to have some difficult conversations, and we can get to that in a minute if you want. But I felt so good that commissioners who had been down there, I was able to go down very briefly and speak with a few folks, all in the midst again of this statewide environment that's different than the Athens environment, and national environment that's different still, was able to produce peaceful resolution to that evening, and then wake up to a phone call. Well, it was up for about an hour and a half, and phone rings at 8:45, and I was thinking it was just going to be a quick after action report. Yeah, just want to let you know traffic's still moving, everything's good downtown, things are cleaned up. Only to find out that the phone call was because Commissioner Neesmith had passed away.
Oh wow, yeah, the quickness to which you don't get to celebrate the peace for long. That must be hard. I see a conversation forming. Let's kind of divert to this for a moment. And Kelly, I'm not going to keep you longer after the hour. I know you're busy, but we will close with the same 3 questions we ask all our guests. So let's try to hone in on this last part here before we do that. So Alex Sams brought up, I'd love to see the ACC government use the CSA monument to actually begin a dialogue between many sides of the issue. When people sit together first, they tend to learn so much more and stand closer together. Is this an option? Milton Leathers, local history legend and pithy individual. Alex is correct. Let's sick. I will talk. Just kidding. And then you lefties pray. That's always good to know. Milton, I've seen your page. You have your own lefty tendencies. But Kelly, this idea of using the monument moment, this moment, the Black Lives Matter moment we're in, to encourage community conversation. You just talked about uncomfortable conversations, irritation. What is your hope for how this moment, the monument move, the Black Lives Matter protests, what is your hope for the conversation our community can have and how we can move forward?
I mean, there are a lot of aspects to this, but I'll just begin by saying very broadly, because I've been responding to many hundreds of emails about policing and how it plays into our future, particularly in light of these sort of racialized killings, that we just need a safer, better resourced community all around. And that's going to mean a lot of things. We don't know what all those things are. We certainly can imagine that it's going to mean taking cues from some places that have done good work. It's probably going to mean some reallocation of resources over time, probably some different responsibilities for not just police officers, but many of us. Said that it's going to mean that we probably do better prenatal care. I mean, among the things I'll double down on is quality housing and quality neighborhoods and safe neighborhoods, neighborhoods that are designed to enrich people's lives, not detract from their lives. Kind of on the monument question, I'm pretty resolute about, I mean, beyond resolute about the move, but I do think it provides us an opportunity to have conversations about, how our history and memory rests in our current day. Visited Germany in the summer 1993. Germany obviously also had a regime that had um, that had a caste system and um, murdered people because of who they were, not what they did. And when you go to the public square in Munich or Hamburg or any of the other places I visited, um, you don't see memorials even to the dead of the SS, even though the reality in any wartime situation is that young people get recruited or drafted and they're made to fight. But you do go to places where, in the context of, say, Dachau, the concentration camp several miles outside Munich, you do have those artifacts. You do have that memory of the dead on every side, but you have a reflective and appropriately contextualized environment. And so I look to that kind of model for some cues.
Thank you. We don't have too much more time. My last question for you before we go into these closing questions is, if I'm correct, you're in City Hall right now. Is that right?
That's right.
Just a random thing here. When we talk about you, one of the things when people talk about you, Kelly, people talk about often about how you're different than most politicians they've seen. For example, I know we've had the Black Lives Matter discussion on this program. You were an early version of an elected official I saw that didn't talk their way around the phrase Black Lives Matter when people were still trying to decide if they should say all lives matter or Black Lives Matter too. You were right down the line on saying Black Lives Matter and addressing it directly. But one thing that visually our viewers can notice right now that I wanted to point to that I think is very telling is your office itself. I've had the pleasure of visiting the mayor's office on a number of occasions. And more often than not, it's set up in the same style we see the Oval Office, the big austere desk where, it's like approaching the Holy of Holies. I, as a constituent, sit down across this big, mahogany desk from you. And as any of our viewers can see right now, you have your desk against the wall like you're doing your schoolwork. That's right. And that's right. And people who come in, it's a much more transparent and approachable environment. Can you talk about why you have it set up that way and how it reflects your approach to your job?
Yeah, I mean, it was set up differently when I arrived, and I've seen a lot of those setups where you feel like you're in I don't know, Godfather sequel, sitting across from the elected leader.
Right.
But I did want my office to exemplify an openness and spirit of collaboration just by the way it was arranged. And so, in addition to my desk not blocking me from anybody who's talking to me, there's a little round table in the corner where, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, we go, an individual, we go sit at that little round table. I'll also just note some exclusively local art in the office, including the Harold Rittenberry behind me that you can see on screen. I mean, I think this is a space that ought to reflect Athens. And when Athens is at its best, we're engaged with each other, and it's easier to engage if I don't have what amounts to a barricade up between me and you.
Thanks for sharing that. I see Milton's comments in the comment section. We encourage people to go back and check those out. There's some productive comments there. But Mayor, we're going to, and thank you for Milton for expressing the idea that taking down the monument will help. We appreciate you sharing your perspective. Mayor, I want to go into our closing three questions here because I know you've got work to do. The first of these three questions is this. If you imagine waking up tomorrow and this was somehow all over, every Athens business was not only offering curbside, things were safely reopened, you could go where you please, and somehow you had the day off, Mayor, where would you go? And how would you spend that day?
I would probably eat about a dozen meals at some local businesses. I'd eat at the Grit. I'd probably sit down at Weaver D's, at least among them. And I would end the evening probably with a few hours over on the floor of the Caledonia Lounge because I really miss live music and being around people who are also enjoying live music and kind of feeling the pulse from the stage. So those are among the things I do.
Good. Yeah, I look forward to seeing what I like to refer to as Black Pocket T-shirt Kelly Girtz, outliving his true hipster best. Once again, just a reference to people going to the comment section. It's a good transition into this second question. I'm going to ask you about historic places. One of the people I see in the comment section right now is a good friend, Reverend B.A. Hart of historic First AME Church. Reverend Hart, always good to see you. Kelly, speaking of historic places like First AME, when we come out of this pandemic, we're likely also going to be coming out of a recession. After recession, you have a lot of pent-up development pressure that has to spill out. Sometimes that can endanger historic places. So what we've been doing is asking each of our guests, what are the historic places that they hope 50 years from now, if some UGA student is watching this interview at the UGA library, and then they step outside into Athens, what are historic places that you hope we save so that that person can still visit? What are some historic places like that to you?
Well, because there are so many that have been lost, the ones that remain are really important to me. Knowing about the specific history of the neighborhood, every time I'm in Hill First Baptist Church,
Mm-hmm.
I get a deep sense of history, the history of the Reese Hancock neighborhood. I always look out those windows and wonder what would it have been like to look out those windows 100 years ago, or even 75 years ago. That one, when I'm there, always resonates with me very strongly.
Thanks for sharing that. Kelly, our last question is this, and I know that this is going to be an important answer. If anyone's answer to this question is important, this one's going to be especially important. Let's flash forward twice as far. Let's go 100 years from now, in the same way that Red and Black recently did a retrospective of the 1918 Spanish flu. If 100 years from now, someone is to look back at this interview and ask, what does Mayor Girtz want me to know about Athens during this moment? What would you have to say to that person a century from now?
I will want it to be true that Athens held on to each other, that the people of Athens held on to each other, and that we raised each other up. And not only did we make it through this pandemic, but we made it through with a bunch of lessons learned in a way that was going to make a better community for everybody who lives here and who follows in our wake.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for taking time with us. Thanks for all the leadership you're doing. On behalf of Historic Athens, we appreciate all the work you're doing on historic places. To our audience, we'll be back on Monday at 1 o'clock with Life from Chesson Community. Please stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, keep social distance, be careful. Mayor Girtz, you and I are going to go offline right now, but thank you again for being on the program. I appreciate it. Thank you.